Oh, there we go. Sorry, I was muted. But good morning. Thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for joining us on this Thanksgiving week. I know it's a short one for everyone, but we really appreciate your attendance. So I'll go through a few updates about IGSPA. As most of you know, I'm Courtney Lull. I'm chairperson of the IGSPA Board of Directors. But just a few things. So 2023 Town Halls and Dig Deepers. If you have abstracts or topics that you'd like us to discuss, please send those along. You can take a look at the events page under events and training at the IGSPA.org website, and you can submit your abstracts there. Super exciting. Hopefully we'll get to see a bunch of you there in Las Vegas, but our annual conference is coming up here in just about 2 weeks. And we're partnered with National Groundwater again this year. It should be great. We want to thank all of our conference sponsors, all of those listed here. Thank you so much. We couldn't be doing this conference without your help. We do have an IGSPA pavilion this year, similar to last year. We're right on the National Groundwater floor. We'll have a big banner right over our booth, and we're actually just inside the entrance, so it'll be a great visibility. We hope you, if you're attending the conference this year, you'll get a chance to stop by and visit all of our vendors. The conference program is available online. We have some great presentations throughout the conference. So if you go to IGSPA.org, Conference 2022, you'll be able to go through the entire program. Just as a reminder, we're no longer waiving CEUs for your renewals for IGSPA for any of your accreditations or certifications. Town Halls, Dig Deepers, the special event in our annual conference now qualify for IGSPA CEUs. If you would like the CEUs for this town hall, please just send a chat message to the IGSPA account with your name and email address, and we'll be happy to record those for you. So just a little housekeeping about the presentation. If you could use the chat function for your speaker questions, just type those in and I will ask those of the speaker throughout the presentation or hold them towards the end. If you could please mute your mic unless we need you to join in, that would be wonderful. And we will be recording the session and we'll be posting it to YouTube later. Just a quick disclaimer. The upcoming presentation represents the opinion of the presenter and does not represent any official position, opinion, or endorsement of any products or services by IGSPA or its members. IGSPA Town Halls and Dig Deeper webinars are for member updates and education on the latest information in the geothermal heat pump industry and are not meant to endorse one technology or brand over another. It is the presenter's responsibility to disclose any conflict of interest or position that may arise in the content of the webinar. So with all of that housekeeping taken care of, I am so excited to introduce our speaker.
Isn't that how they all start?
Yeah.
Tell me how excited you really are, Courtney. Oh.
I am so excited, especially this one. This is a topic, and Steve, you chimed in, and you and I have had extensive conversations about this topic. But I will stop sharing so that Jacob can start. But Jacob Goldman is the Vice President of Energy Tax Savers. He has a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from the University of Buffalo and an MBA from the University of Maine. He is the co-author of numerous articles published in Building Operating Management, Worship Facilities Magazine, Unit Magazine, Green Lodging News, International Parking Institute, Corporate Business Taxation Monthly, and Thomson Reuters. He has presented to hundreds of corporations, architectural firms, engineering firms, accounting firms, local chapters of USGBC, IFMA, BOMA, and the local Cleveland chapter of AEE, as well as the national conferences of AEE, Lightfair, NFMT, NALMCO, IGSPA, PIMA, and EMC. Jacob has also been a consistent speaker at GE's Nela Park and Cooper's The Source in Greentree, Georgia, or Peachtree, Georgia. So without further ado, I will let Jacob get started with this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you for that introduction. So we're going to talk about the Inflation Reduction Act. Within that conversation, we're going to talk about the enhancements the Inflation Reduction Act made to alternative energy credits. We're also going to talk about the enhancements made to 179D. And then we're going to briefly talk about apprenticeships, and you'll see why that's relevant as we go along. So in specific, I'll be discussing what some people call alternative energy credits, other people call the investment tax credit, other people call Section 48. These are commercial credits. These are not for your single family home, for example. So these credits are specifically for commercial scale type projects. And I've listed out a sampling of them. There's more technologies than this. For example, wind is not on this table. But probably one technology is of interest to you, and that's the ground source heat pumps right here. And now, most of you know that there has been a credit out there. Historically, it was at the 10% level. Some people thought that this was an increase in credit. That's not 100% true, although in most cases it is true. But in some cases, it actually is a decrease in credit. And there's now a concept called the base credit. So ground source heat pumps now qualify for the base credit, which is 6%. And solar is 6%. A whole bunch of other technologies are 6%. It looks like micro turbines might not have had the lobbying effort they wanted because they're the only ones still trapped at the 2% level. So there's a base credit, and then there's a number of bonuses that you can get. Sometimes I kind of feel like I'm kind of doing an infomercial because wait, there's more. There's another bonus you can qualify for. What's interesting is you can stack these things, and for solar, for example, you could stack it and get all the way up to 70% tax credit, meaning the federal government will pay 70% of the cost of the project. And you'll only have to pay 30% of the cost. And that's not even including rebates or state incentives. This is strictly from the federal government. Now, for ground source heat pump, that maxes out at 50%. So if you have the right project in the right location, using the right labor force, using the right equipment, you could get all the way up to 50%. And we're going to go into details on how you get each one of these bonuses. But before we do that, there are two very interesting, and by the way, if anybody has any questions, don't hesitate to put it in the chat, and we'll answer those as they come in, depending if they were non-repetitive and important for continuing the conversation. And any questions not answered, I'll try to get to after the presentation. And to the extent that you want a copy of these slides, don't hesitate to shoot me an email at jacob.goldman@energytaxsavers.com. Shoot me this email and we'll get you a copy of the slides. Okay, that being said, so there's two interesting things in the Inflation Reduction Act before we get into each one of those bonuses. One of them is this section 6418. So what's interesting about 6418 is there's lots of taxpayers out there, commercial taxpayers, that don't have a large tax capacity. In order to get a tax credit, you have to owe taxes. If you don't owe taxes, so for example, if you're in a loss position or you're in a preferential category that doesn't really have to pay taxes, but you're a taxable entity, you can now transfer those credits. You can sell them. And one of the things that we're working on is potentially a marketplace where you'll be able to sell those tax credits. So commercial tax-paying for-profit entities will be able to either take the credit themselves, or if they want to, they can put them out into a marketplace and sell them. Now, what do we know about the selling of tax credits so far? What we know is that there's things called state film credits. They typically sell at the 70 cents to 95 cents on the dollar. There's historic tax credits. There's other tax credits that are sellable. They all typically sell in the 70 cents to 95 cents on the dollar. So you won't get the full value of your credit, but you could get as high as 95% of the value of the credit, and you'll be able to sell those to other tax-paying entities that want that credit. But this is only for for-profit businesses. They're not for government and they're not for not-for-profits. The other interesting one is this section 6417. 6417, this is just incredible. if you wanted to help a not-for-profit put in a ground source heat pump, for example, you would have to create some sort of tax equity partnership LLC where you were selling the energy use with a PPA or something like that to bring down the cost of the project. That being said, there was probably lots of not-for-profits not doing those projects because it was just too complicated. For the very first time, and we're not exactly sure how it's going to work, not-for-profits will directly get these same tax credits. So this list of tax credits right here with all the bonuses, not-for-profits will directly get those tax credits. And then it's also extended for some government buildings. So it's not federal government buildings, but it is extended for state and local governments. So if you had a K through 12 public school and you were doing a ground source heat pump project, that K through 12 public school will now directly get that tax credit. First time in history that the federal government is going to be paying a tax credit. We don't know exactly how it's going to work, but those items are going to be directly being able to be sent directly to the not-for-profit or the state or local government. It is not available for federal, just so you're aware. There's some other categories here. So Tennessee Valley Authority, Indian Tribal, Alaska Native, co-op, energy co-ops. Those entities will directly be able to get a tax credit, all because of Section 6417. Both of these incentives start for projects placed in service in 2023. So very unique legislation. The first one is taxpayers will now be able to sell their credits. And the second one is not-for-profits and some government projects will directly be able to get these tax credits in their own pocket. Very powerful legislation. So let's talk about some of the bonuses. So the first bonus is the 5-time bonus. The way you qualify for the 5-time bonus, there's 3 different ways you can qualify. So the first way, probably the easiest way, excuse me, is your project is a small project. The definition of small is 1 megawatt. The writers of this legislation live in a solar-centric world, and that's why they picked this way of expressing a small project. We believe that translates to 284 tons. And notice there's a question mark there. Ground source heat pump is not normally rated in megawatts. So we did a conversion, and that conversion converted megawatts to cooling tons of 284 tons. It is quite possible that IRS will, back this up. We're hopeful that they'll back this up, but they could, go in a completely different direction. Don't know. Hopefully they come up with this 284 tons because, the math is pretty clear that a megawatt and 284 tons are equivalent. So the first way you get the 5-time bonus is if you're a small project. If you're not a small project, the way you qualify is by meeting the prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirement. Now, this guidance has not come out yet, but prevailing wage is a concept that is somewhat known in the world. Department of Labor has prevailing wages for electricians, for laborers, for mechanics. They have prevailing wages for many jurisdictions in the country. You can go to various websites and look up what the prevailing wage is. So more than likely, the installing contractors will need to be paying their installers prevailing wage or higher. And then apprenticeship, we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. There is a now requirement, and it's you have to meet both prevailing wage and apprenticeship. The only other way to qualify that big project is by starting your project before they come out with the guidance. Now, it is our belief that they're going to come out with this guidance soon. What do I mean by soon? Could be this year, could be early next year. Don't know exactly when, but we do believe that this guidance is coming out soon. So from the moment that guidance comes out, plus 60 days, as long as you start your project, and And the definition to start your project isn't defined either. We're gonna have to figure that one out as well. But as long as for example, if you want to prove that you started your project, you're going to want to spend, 10, 12, 13% of the project cost. You're going to want to have activity at this job site. You want to be, drilling boreholes, for example. But assuming you meet the requirements, whatever started means, before 60 days after this guidance comes in, and you're doing a large project, you also qualify for the 5-time bonus. So any project in 2022 is going to qualify for the 5-time bonus. So if you're doing a project right now in 2022, it'll qualify for the 5-time bonus, and that project will qualify for the 30%. The next bonus, once again, I feel like an infomercial, but wait, there's more. So the domestic content bonus, lots of ground source heat pump manufacturers are made in the USA. So that's great. If 40% of the cost of steel, iron, or manufactured product is produced in the USA, you get the bonus. Now, the bonus technically is a 2% bonus. So your 6% goes up to 8%. But if you meet the 5-time bonus, then that 2%, 2 times 5 equals 10%. And so now you're up to 40%. So it depends on whether you meet that 5-time bonus or not. Now, the domestic content bonus, and this is important, the domestic content bonus comes into effect in 2023 for projects placed in service in 2023. So you cannot get the domestic content bonus for your 2022 projects. You can only get it for your 2023 projects, just so you're aware.
Hey, Jacob, a quick question. Someone asked,
Sure.
So 2022 projects are included? They could get the 5-time bonus and everything else?
Not the everything else part, but
well, not domestic credit, right? But
right, 6% times 5%, they can get 30. And I have a slide. I'm not going to really go over that slide, but for those that want to parse why that is, I have a slide in here that will allow you to read through the very complicated IRA and see why I say that the 5-time bonus and the 6% are both available to you in 2022.
And one more question. Someone had asked, do wastewater energy transfer, WET technologies apply for any of those tax credits? Or have you seen any language regarding to those?
Can you repeat that? I don't think I captured everything.
Sure. Do wastewater energy transfer, WET technologies apply for any of these tax credits?
Wastewater. So that person should just email me. I don't know the answer to the question off the top of my head. I always have to re-look at because there is something called waste energy credit. And I got to see how they define that. So I would need the specifics on the project. And if that person just shoots me an email, I'll make sure I get them an answer.
Great, thank you.
As a more direct answer, and you'll see this a little later, I'll define ground source heat pump. And my guess is what they're talking about doesn't meet the requirements for ground source heat pump, but that doesn't mean it's not another category that qualifies. So I can definitively say it doesn't meet the requirements for ground source heat pump, but it might meet another category. Okay. The energy community bonus, or I like to call it the Joe Manchin credit. The reason I do is for these first ones here. If your project is in a census tract or adjoining tract with a coal mine closed since 2000, your project gets this bonus. And once again, it is a 2% bonus, but if you meet the 5-time bonus, it becomes a 10% bonus. 2 times 5 equals 10. And once again, you can stack these. So if you meet the domestic content and you meet the energy community, you can stack it and get additional credit. That brings up the question, what's a census tract? And I'll show you that on the next slide. But the next way you qualify, there's 5 different ways you qualify for the energy community bonus. The first one is that you put the project where in a census tract where a coal mine closed, or where or adjacent to where a coal mine closed. since 2000. The next one, so where are coal mines closing? You know, it's West Virginia, it's Kentucky. There are other places, but that's kind of why I call it the Joe Manchin bonus. The next one is where census tract or adjoining census tract where a coal-fired plant closed since 2010. So coal-fired plants are all throughout the country. So if you just happen to have a project that's in one of those areas, you can qualify. And I gave some websites here. Using those websites, you can kind of figure out where they've closed, and I'll explain that a little later in the next couple slides. If you do your project on a brownfield, you get the bonus. These last two, I have no idea how you figure out where the bonus is. I'm hoping the IRS just hands us a map and says, if you're on this map, you qualify. And the way it's defined is an area with 0.17% direct employment related to coal, oil, or natural gas, and you had higher than average unemployment in that area. So I don't know where that is. Maybe that also is in West Virginia. Maybe that's in Texas in some places. I don't know exactly where 0.17% of direct employment come from those technologies. And that area also has high unemployment. The other way you can do it is 25% of tax revenue comes from coal, oil, and natural gas, and you have higher unemployment. Don't know where those come, where to find those. I'm hoping IRS at some point is just going to hand us a map. So I just want to explain census tract to you a little bit. So census tracts can be quite small. So this is an area, I think it's near Evansville, Indiana. You'll see that these are not huge swaths of areas. So if your coal mine was here, then all these adjacent ones around it also. So if you do your project in this box, then you qualify for the bonus. Typically a census tract is delineating 2,500 to 8,000 residents. So you can imagine in major cities like Chicago, the census tracts are quite small, could just be a block or two. And then in places where there's a lot of space, let's say Iowa or Kansas, the census tracts might be quite large. And then it's the adjacent tracts as well that qualify. This is a sample, a small sample. If you go to that website, you can kind of figure out where coal plants have closed. And this is a small sample of coal plants that have closed for a bunch of states. And if you ask for this, if you send me an email for these slides, jacob.goldman@energytaxsavers.com, we'll send you this whole thing. Now, the way to do the coal mines, there's a website here. What I did is I took the list of all the active coal mines in 2001, and then took the list of all the active coal mines in 2020, and then the ones that weren't in 2020 that were in 2001, I'm assuming are the closed ones. I don't know if that's the best way to figure this out, but it's the way I figured it out. And then each coal mine has a number, and then you can click on these numbers and you can find out exactly where they're located. Then you'd have to go to a GIS map to find out which census tract it's in, and then you could determine if your project is in that census tract or adjoining census tract. The next one, the next bonus is called the low income bonus. This is not available for ground source heat pump, just to be aware. This is only available for solar and wind, so not available for ground source heat pump, but I put it in here anyways to the extent that your projects might extend to do solar as well. I call it the low income bonus. So if you're in a low income community or on Indian land, you get a 10% bonus. If you're a qualified low-income residential builder, a qualified low-income economic benefit project, you get a 20% bonus. And that's why solar and wind can get all the way up to 70%, where ground source heat pump only goes up to 50%. Low-income community, it's usually where there's 20% below the poverty line. This is the New York metro area. And so if you did your project in one of these kind of greenish spaces, then your project would your solar project or your wind project would get the 10% bonus, the community one, the low income community project bonus. So here's all those technologies. Again, you'll see ground source heat pump starts out at 6%. If you get the 5-time bonus, that's 30%. If you're made in the USA in 2023, you get it up to 40%. If you're in an energy community, you get it up to 50%. That's how you max out the ground source. So you historically, ground source heat pump had a 10% credit. I think quite easily you could get to 40, and maybe you can even get to 50. So if you were able to sell your projects at a 10% credit, imagine how much easier it'll be to sell at a 40% credit or even at a 50% credit. And that doesn't even count rebates available and state incentives available potentially. So you really can stack these things up. And I think it's going to really do well for the ground source heat pump industry in increasing sales. Okay, so this is a slide on why I think it's 6%. I'm not really going to go over it, but if you have your, I carry around a copy of my Inflation Reduction Act in my pocket. If you have that and you whip it out and you go to subsection D2, you can see where in 2022, ground source heat pump gets 6%. You'll also see section K, which says the 5-time bonus. Well, actually, it's section Q1 and Q2. It says the 5-time bonus starts in 2022. And so 6 times 5 equals 30%. There is an interesting aspect. Ground source heat pump is the only technology that got extension all the way out to, I think it was like 2035, where most end at 2025. There is a little bit of a ratcheting down in 2033 and 34. So the credit the base credit drops to 5.2% and then drops to 4.4% in those out years. But if you ask for copies of the slides, you can all look this up and take a look at your copy of the Inflation Reduction Act and figure out what I'm kind of saying here. So this is kind of the reason that waste water question, why I don't think it qualifies for ground source heat pump, but might qualify for something else. So the definition for ground source heat pump is equipment which uses the ground or groundwater as a thermal energy source to heat a structure or as a thermal energy sink to cool a structure, but only with the respect to property, the construction of which begins before January 1, 2035. So that's why I don't necessarily think the wastewater one fits in to this particular incentive. It might fit into something else, another category, but I think it actually has to be in the ground or from groundwater. So what's typically qualifying? So upstream of the heat pump, so the ground source heat pump itself qualifies, the boreholes qualify, and so that upstream, no questions, all qualify, and construction must begin before 1/1/2035.
Jacob, can we ask just a quick question?
Sure.
When we talk about the source side, so whether it's a bore field, I assume it could be any type of geosystem. So whether it's a lake loop or pond loop or slinky system or vertical bore field or directionally drilled field, any of those would be included in this?
Yeah, I think so. The lake one, I think they would call that groundwater. One of the big issues here is nobody's going out, IRS is not going out and defining all these terms for us. And they haven't defined all these terms for us. And you'll see that in this slide that's up on the screen. So to the extent that you feel that all of those meet that I'll go back to the slide, is using the ground for a thermal energy source or groundwater as a thermal energy source or sink. As long as a lake is groundwater, I think it is, but I don't know necessarily that they've exactly defined all that. So unfortunately, we all want lots of answers and they leave it gray. I would say that you have an excellent case, and we would, if a person was our client and they did a project where they were using the lake as a sink or a source, we would go with it, and we would defend it to the death, that it would qualify. Does that answer your question?
Yes,
Shortly?
perfect. And then one other question as it relates to the inside stuff. What about ductwork controls, all the piping for distribution? Are all those part of this incentive as well?
So I'm glad you mentioned that, because you teed it up for my next slide right here.
Perfect.
So the question is obviously about downstream equipment from the heat pump. And so the answer is it may qualify as well. Now, once again, this is a situation where we would love IRS to have just handed us something on a silver platter. They have not. But there's some old laws. The way laws work is by you borrow things from the past and use them as a defense currently. So there is a regulation, and it's section 1.48-9C10(4). And that regulation is strictly related to geothermal, not to ground source heat pump, but to geothermal, literally the extraction of hot water from the earth to either create electricity. And it goes way back to like 1979, just so you're clear. So using that tax interpretation, that information from geothermal, it appears that any equipment where its energy is coming from the ground in greater than 75% of the annual energy use would be included. So if you have a building that is solely using ground source heat pumps to heat and cool, there is no other backup equipment, there's no auxiliary equipment, there's just ground source heat pump equipment, where 100%, then, and also it's new construction, because you got to be paying for the project, all the pipes, ductwork, heat exchangers, diffusers, all the items downstream would 100% be eligible for the credit. To the extent that you do have auxiliary equipment, then it depends on what percentage of the overall annual energy use comes from that auxiliary equipment. If 26%, if 25.1% of that annual energy comes from auxiliary equipment, and they dual use the ductwork, for example, and diffusers, then none of the ductwork and none of the diffusers would qualify using the interpretation from the section 1.48-9C10(4). So it really depends on how your system is designed, and you'd want your ground source heat pump to be providing over 75% of the energy use using this tax interpretation. I clearly state it as a tax interpretation because there is no example out there for an actual ground source heat pump project. So what right near this section, 1.48-9C10(6), are some examples that you all might find very interesting. So I'll read the first one. On October 1st, 1979, Corporation X, a calendar year taxpayer, places in service a system which heats its office building by circulating hot water heated by energy derived from a geothermal deposit through the building. Geothermal equipment includes the circulation system, including the pumps and pipes which circulate the hot water through the building. So that's the first example. They continue the example. The facts are the same as example one, except that Corporation X also places in service a traditional boiler to produce hot water for heating the building exclusively in the event of a failure of the geothermal equipment. Such a boiler is not geothermal equipment, so you can't take the boiler as part of the credit. But the existence of such a backup system does not serve to disqualify the property eligible in example one, except if that usage is more than 25%, which you'll then see in example 3, which I'm not going to read, but I'll highlight. They do say in one case the boiler does 20%, in which case you can only take the dual equipment that are pumps and pipes. You can only take that at the 80% level. If it drops in a year below that, you might have to send your money back. If you want a copy of these slides, you can see these examples and you can read through them and get that. But at the end of the day, for geothermal deposits, the magic number is 75%, and we believe you could base your ground source heat pump calculations off of that same technique, but it is a tax interpretation. And I want to make clear that it is an interpretation. It is not, just directly written that way for ground source heat pump. So that ends the alternative energy portion of my presentation. Are there any questions there on the alternative energy credits? Because we're going to move on to another incentive that was changed by the IRA that is also available for ground source heat pump projects.
So we can go through some of the questions that have been asked currently. So someone did ask, has there been any guidance or any rules or anything given on how schools and nonprofits can get direct payments if they don't want to sell the tax credits? And are there any, other than no federal buildings, but are there any other rules about nonprofits or non-tax paying entities that wouldn't apply for that IRA?
Okay, so the first part is schools and nonprofits cannot sell their credit. They are not eligible to sell their credit. The only thing they're eligible for is directly get the credit. And there is no guidance, unfortunately, on how to go about it. The good news is that it's only for projects placed in service. And well, I don't know that it's good news, but it's only available for projects placed in service in 2023. So as 2023 occurs, IRS will come out with more guidance. We are hopeful that they'll give these entities the ability to get the credit immediately after the project completes. We know for sure that you can't get the credit before the project is placed in service. So hopefully they'll create a way for you to get these, that the school or the not-for-profit, the private university will be able to get these tax credits immediately after the project is placed in service. It is possible that they will require it to be made on tax forms that will be filed in, for example, a not-for-profit files tax forms. They file, like, I think it's called a 990. I don't know exactly when they're due, but let's say they're due March 15th or April 15th. So they might require that you file it the year after you placed it in service before your filing deadline, which would be a little upsetting that it takes that long to get the money back. So we don't know which one of those options the IRS is going to take, but we do know there is going to be forms, and Energy Tax Savers knows that these type entities are not used to filling out this type of form. So we're hoping that we're going to be able to help not-for-profits and government buildings, state and local, get these credits and file that paperwork. But we don't know what the rules are. There was a comment period that ended, I think, 2 weeks ago on the topic. People put in a whole bunch of comments on how they want this to work, but we don't know how IRS is going to interpret those comments. And what I can tell you definitively is it's going to take time. I would be surprised if we get guidance in the first quarter. I would say, sometime later we'll get guidance on that.
Sure. It's a big, complicated topic, I'm sure. One question someone had asked, the megawatt of energy, is that from the ground or delivered to the occupied space? Where are they taking that?
Yeah, great question. My guess, it's about the equipment itself. So it's the tonnage of your equipment. So if you're putting in ground source heat pump, less than 284 tons of ground source heat pump equipment, then that's where it would be. But once again, unfortunately, not a lot of guidance on the topic as of yet.
Sure. Is there a site or search engine for determining these areas for the AEC-B?
Which one?
They were asking, I assume it's for all the energy community credits. So whether it's finding the coal-fired plants or finding, and I saw you listed the
yeah. So for these two ones, I've given you the ability to, I've created the links that you'll be able to figure it out on your own. There's nothing for brownfields. These two here, I'm just hopeful IRS just hands us something, because I have no idea how you go about calculating that.
Sure. Someone did ask clarification. What if it was a coal-fired plant closed but retrofitted to natural gas?
I think that would qualify. I think
Okay.
you'd be good.
Great. There is lots of questions, but you answer so many of them in your presentation. It's great. Thank you. So I would say if you want to keep going on to section 179, I'll keep reading through the questions and we'll ask them here shortly.
Okay, so this is a completely different incentive. It's been around since 2000 for projects placed in service in 2006. Ground source heat pump has been a big qualifier for this incentive. For your commercial clients, it is a tax deduction in lieu of depreciation. But there's some unique aspects. So if you're designing projects for certain building types, the designer actually gets the benefit. So for commercial clients, it's a deduction in lieu of depreciation. But for designers of certain building classes, historically that was government buildings, the designer gets the benefit. And it incentivizes lighting, HVAC, and building envelope. We've done, 16,000 buildings nationwide since this thing started back in 2006, and helped the designers get the benefit for government buildings, and the commercial building owners get the benefit for commercial buildings. There's been a number of changes in the Inflation Reduction Act. These changes only come about for projects placed in service starting next year. So these changes are not relevant for your 2022 projects. They're only relevant for your 2023 projects. So the first one is, historically, 2022 and before, designers could get the benefit for government buildings. Now they can also get the benefit for not-for-profits, instrumentalities, and Indian tribal governments. So the designer now can benefit from a lot more building classes than just the government buildings. The tax deduction in some cases went up and in some cases went down. So if you meet those prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, the deduction goes up to $2.50 to $5 a square foot. If you don't meet those prevailing wage and apprenticeship requirements, the deduction goes down to 50 cents to $1. The deduction right now is 63 cents for each measure, with a max of $1.88. There was an inflation adjuster on it. It used to be 60 cents, 60 cents, 60 cents, adding up to $1.80. Now it's $63, $88. I know the math doesn't work out there, but they did define it as $1.88. So how do you qualify for these 50 cents to $1 or $2.50 to $5? You have to show that your building is 25% better than a reference building, or up to 50% better to get the maximum. And if you're anywhere in between, you're in between. But it's now holistic. It's the whole building's energy use. You used to be able to qualify just for the lighting or just for the HVAC or just for the envelope. Now it's more holistic. You got to qualify for the entire building. There are two ways to qualify. So one is through energy simulation modeling. You model your building. You model a reference building built to an ASHRAE 90.1 standard. You compare the two. If you're at 25%, you get the lower end. If you're at 50%, you get the higher end. If you're in between, you're in between. The other way to qualify, the new way to qualify, is for retrofits and retrofits only. And that's where you use energy use intensity. So you get 12 months of bills before the project, 12 months of bills after the project. If you show that your building after the project is 25 to 50% below energy EUI compared to before, then you qualify. Same rules, anywhere in between, you're in between. The deduction used to be once for the lifetime of the building. Now there's a reset. So your commercial buildings can get a reset every 3 years, and your tax exempt buildings get a reset. Tax exempt and government buildings get a reset every 4 years. Meaning, if you've already done a project 4 years ago at a building, if you do a new project in 2023, that project can qualify again for tax deduction. So you can go back to the trough every 3 or 4 years, depending on the building type. So it is a tax deduction. So if you had a 100,000 square foot middle school, for example, the designer could get a $500,000 tax deduction. That's a very large tax deduction. We have some designers that haven't paid income taxes since 2006. So they paid no income taxes whatsoever because all they do is design energy efficiently. And some of them are in the ground source heat pump industry. They design ground source heat pump projects for K through 12 schools, and they completely wipe out their tax liability. They pay no income taxes whatsoever. Very powerful for designers of government and tax exempt buildings. What is a designer? A designer is a person that creates the technical specifications. A person that merely installs, repairs it, or maintains the property is not a designer. Deductions pass through to the primary designers of government buildings, not-for-profits, and tribal governments. So government buildings, we're talking military bases, courthouses, post offices. On the state side, we do a lot of state universities. On the county, city, town, probably our largest category is K through 12 public schools. But now for not-for-profits, you have parochial schools, you have hospitals, you have, 50% of all the hospitals in the country are not-for-profits. You have churches, you have private universities. The designer now gets the benefit for those incentives, for those designs as well. Tribal government, shopping plazas, hotels, offices, obviously casinos. If you're putting in ground source heat pump and you're the designer, you would get a very large tax deduction for that project. So how do you qualify? You need two things. You need a project. It has to be related to lighting, HVAC, or envelope. And you need to meet a standard. The standard for 2006 to 2015 was ASHRAE 2001. The standard now is ASHRAE 2007. And we believe that it's going to continue to be ASHRAE 2007 all the way to 2026. IRS could have a different interpretation, but there's pretty good consensus now that ASHRAE 2007 is going to be the standard to beat all the way to 2026. After that, it's probably going to be ASHRAE 2019. So 2027 and beyond, it's likely to be 2019. And then obviously for retrofits, you can qualify through the modeling method, or you can qualify through the EUI reduction method. Either one is available to you. So what technologies tend to qualify? And by the way, I have not adjusted this slide for this presentation. Ground source heat pump is the #1 technology, especially if you're meeting most of the load of the building. Ground source heat pump is the largest qualifier for this incentive. Because you have to move the bar by so much, ground source heat pump is one of the technologies that tends to do that. And we think it might be one of the few technologies that will still be able to do that when they change it to ASHRAE 2019. Thermal storage is also interesting, and combined heat and power. Those are all technologies that you can both get the alternative energy credit and you can get this 179D. So for example, if you do a ground source heat pump project for a K through 12 school, the K through 12 school can get the credit, that new alternative energy credit, and you as designer can get this 179D deduction. You can double dip. You can get both of these incentives on top of each other. We need data, so we need architectural, mechanical, electrical, plumbing, drawing sets, ComCheck, lighting, and HVAC spec sheets. We need plans if whatever plans are available. We need to run an energy simulation model on these buildings. So we need as much data as you can provide in order to confirm that you had the 25 to 50% drop against ASHRAE 2007. So the key changes here, we have the $1.88 in the old incentive. Starting in 2023, that moves up to $5. Individual systems can qualify in the old incentive. Now it's more of a whole building analysis. The designer could only qualify for government projects. Now they can qualify for not-for-profits and tribal. You could only take the deduction once over the lifetime of the building. Now it resets every 3 or 4 years. You have to, in the old incentive, you had to be ASHRAE 2007. Now you can meet ASHRAE 2007, beat ASHRAE 2007, or you can do EUI calculation. So that brings us to one slide on the apprenticeship requirement. So we don't have a lot of details on the apprenticeship. We do know that once they come out with the rules, you're going to have to meet it. What I can tell you is eventually it moves up to 15% of the total labor hours has to come from apprentices. That's for after 2024. 15% of total labor hours has to come from apprentices. if a project has 4 or more workers, at least one is required to be an apprentice. And the apprentice must be part of a registered apprenticeship program. And that's defined here at 3131. Once again, if you want these slides, don't hesitate to shoot me an email at jacob.goldman@energytaxsavers.com. There is some, good faith items to this. So if you try to get an apprentice and the apprenticeship program can't provide you with one, as long as you show a good faith effort, and obviously they didn't define how you show a good faith effort, but eventually they will define it. You can go without apprentices if you meet the good faith effort requirements of trying to get an apprentice. But these rules will come out, and we think they're going to come out. They're going to probably be the earliest rules that come out. So that could be this year, could be early next year. So we'll know more as time goes by. With that, the presentation is done. Obviously, I'm here to answer any questions people have. And then if anybody wants copies of the slides, don't hesitate to shoot me an email at jacob.goldman@energytaxsavers.com. If anybody has specific questions, don't hesitate to shoot me an email on those specific questions, call us. We'd be glad to help. And with that, I open it up to questions.
Absolutely, and we have a few. First, I feel like we're all probably taking information from a fire hose. So again, as you said, if you have any questions or need anything, Energy Tax Savers, I'm sure, would be willing to help. But one of the questions we have, which I thought was a good one, is the ITC value based on a project value before any rebates? So if your project value is $1 million and it gets $300,000 of local rebates, is then the ITC based on 700,000 or is it based on $1 million?
So it really depends on who's getting the rebates. So for example, if the installer is getting the rebates, for example, and not the building owner, then your basis is the $700,000. I used to know this answer for the other way around. I'm going to have to get back to you on the other way around.
Sure.
When the installer gets the incentive and the only thing they're charging the client is the $700,000, then it's the $700,000. But it might be the $1 million on when if you receive the rebate directly. From a conservative standpoint, if you take the $700,000, you're definitely being more conservative. So there's no risk in taking the lower number, but obviously people would much rather take the larger number.
Sure. So someone asked a third-party ownership question, and I think this one comes up often, but third-party ownership of the ground loops, just the exterior portion. Can the company that owns the ground loop take the tax credit or get a direct payment if they don't also own the heat pumps?
Yeah. So I guess I don't know the exact answer. And once again, there's not going to be, it's not like I can go look up in some book what the answer would be. You would end up taking a tax position. And so let me just read this so I feel how my gut feels about it. Equipment which uses the ground or groundwater as a thermal energy source to heat a structure, as a thermal energy sink to cool a structure, but only with respect to property the construction of which begins before. My gut is that a credit is, my gut is that a credit should be, because a credit would be available if you owned everything. A credit should also be available if you only own part of it. So I don't think you magically remove the credit eligibility for a piece of property just because now the ownership is bifurcated. So my gut is saying that you'd be able to get a credit, but I don't have a direct answer for you. Sure.
So can you define being placed in service in 2023? Is that effective for new construction, or retrofits also qualify if they're in service in 2023?
Yeah, so placed in service means the equipment is basically turned on and fully operational and functioning from that date on. So for example, if it's turned on and operational in 2022, you can't magically say, oh, it's also operational and turned on for the first time in 2023. So it is turned on, operational, and used used for the first time in 2023, that means it was placed in service in 2023.
So someone also asked, related to the section 179, doesn't conventional equipment also qualify for the section 179 deduction? Or is there a difference between using, do you get an extra incentive for using renewable energy?
So 179D does, you'll notice that a lot of the other technologies here are conventional equipment. It is just, you just need to show that you're 25% better than a reference building built in 2007. So you can do that with conventional equipment. It's just a lot easier to do it with the ground source heat pump. So I'm not saying that ground source, it's only for ground source heat pump. It is definitely available for conventional equipment, but ground source heat pump, if you're doing it, you're going to qualify.
Just as a reminder, we are getting close to time. Any questions that are asked in the chat, we will get with you, Jacob, and we will distribute those out. But another question we have is, does the IRA or any other incentive program offer or facilitate temporary financing until the credit is paid out? They're thinking otherwise developers will need to come up with the extra financing cost to fund 4GO or other technologies until the credit is paid out.
So I did not read the entire IRA and try to understand all of it. I do not think there is any mechanism for that. That being said, I know creative people are going to utilize the ability of sellability, the ability of knowing that these incentives are defined. So I'm assuming banks will come up with programs that will allow you to finance the amount of the credit until the credit comes in your pocket. I'd be willing to bet that will be a way a bank will try to make kind of loan interest money by financing the time between the start of the project and the placed in service and when the credit actually comes in. So nothing, I am unaware of anything specifically in the IRA for funding, but I do think creative banks will come up with methods to do that.
So someone did ask a question here that for commercial property, the section 179D credit is in lieu of depreciation. Maybe just describe what the historical 179 tax incentive is and how it, we see how it changes from previous to now, but just generally what it is and how it works.
Yeah, so a commercial building owner, so ground source heat pump property is 5-year property. So it has favorable depreciation. So moving it from 5 to immediate is not that valuable. But to the extent your project, a ground source heat pump project, is part of a bigger project that might include roofs or walls or something like that, or a new construction, I'm sure there's, typical depreciation for a commercial client is 39-year property. Having to depreciate something 1/39th a year for 39 years is a very slow way to recoup the cost of a project. And so moving that to immediate using 179D is very valuable. So if you have ground source heat pump in a new construction building, we could then apply the deduction against the roof, and that would be very valuable to the building owner. So now for designers of government and not tax exempt buildings, this is just a deduction that comes out of thin air, very valuable coming out of thin air. But in general, what is 179D? If you put energy efficient equipment into a building and that building's performance based on energy simulation modeling is better than the reference standard by the appropriate amount, that building qualifies for the tax deduction. So if you're a government or tax exempt building, that deduction goes to the designer. If you're a commercial building, that tax deduction goes to the building owner in lieu of depreciating those assets. So that's kind of the background basics for 179D.
Great. So one last question, and we will email you the rest. But at what point in the process would a company like Energy Tax Savers be included?
Yeah, so 99% of the time, we come in after the project's already done, and then we help get all the incentives after the project's done. Have we been brought in early, and can you review this for me on a consulting basis and see what you think will qualify? Yes, but 99% of the time it's after placed in service, and then we help the customers get all the incentives that they qualify for.
Great. Well, with that, I cannot thank you enough. Again, I feel like I've taken in information from a fire hose and I don't know that I was capable of retaining it all. So I can't wait to watch the recording on YouTube. But hopefully we'll be able to do a follow-up with you as we start to get some more clarification from the IRS in the new year. But in the meantime, if anyone has any questions, Jacob's contact information is listed on the screen, and we'd be happy to get it to you if you send an email to info@igspa.org. But I just want to thank you, Jacob, so much for taking your time today, especially in this holiday week, and thank everyone for joining us today. Look forward to hopefully seeing everyone at the conference, or we'll see you at the next town hall. Have a great one.
Thank you for having me.